The moment a head coach kicked her own superstar out of the huddle on national television, and the entire internet exploded. What you just heard about is not a rumor. It actually happened. On May 30th, 2026, cameras caught something that nobody in women's basketball was ready to see. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White got into a heated sideline confrontation with the most famous basketball player on the planet right now, Caitlin Clark. And then, right in front of thousands of fans, coaches, cameras, and the whole world watching from home, White told Clark to get out of the huddle. Just get out.
Sit down.
The internet lost its mind. But here's the thing. This story is not what you think it is. And the woman who ended up telling the whole truth about it, the person who stepped up and said what nobody else would say, was a 6-foot guard from Missouri named Sophie Cunningham. A woman who kicked a player on the floor for touching her teammate. A woman who tore her MCL and came back swinging. A woman who now sits between two of the most intense personalities in the WNBA and somehow keeps them both in check. This is the full story. Every detail, every twist, every piece of drama that the internet got completely wrong, and every piece they may have gotten completely right. By the time this video ends, you're going to understand exactly what happened between Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, and Sophie Cunningham, and why the whole thing is actually one of the most compelling stories in all of sports right now. Let's go back to the beginning. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Never Lost. Before we get to the fire, you need to understand Stephanie White. Because if you don't know who Stephanie White is, then nothing that happened on May 30th makes any sense at all. Stephanie White grew up in West Lebanon, Indiana. And if you're not from the Midwest, you might not understand what that means. Indiana is not just a state that loves basketball. Indiana is a state where basketball is a religion. Where kids grow up dreaming of playing for Purdue or Indiana, where high school gyms pack out on Friday nights the way football stadiums do in Texas. Basketball is in the water in Indiana. And Stephanie White drank all of it. By the time she was a senior in high school, she was Miss Basketball in Indiana. Not just a great player, the best player in the whole state. In 1995, she was also named the Gatorade National Player of the Year and the USA Today National Player of the Year. She was, by any measure, the most dominant prep basketball player in the country. Then she went to Purdue, and she just kept winning. In 1999, her senior year, she led the Purdue Boilermakers to the NCAA Women's National Championship. She won the Wade Trophy that same year, which is basically the Heisman Trophy of women's basketball. She was named the Big Ten's Most Outstanding Player. She was a consensus All-American. And she graduated not just as a basketball legend, but as an academic All-American, a member of Phi Beta Kappa, the most prestigious academic honor society in the country. When she got to the WNBA, she played 5 seasons, mostly with the Indiana Fever, the same franchise she'd eventually coach. She retired in 2004, and even in retirement, she barely slowed down. She became an assistant coach. Then she became a college basketball analyst for ESPN. Then she became a sideline reporter for the Indiana Pacers. She was everywhere, soaking up everything, building a brain full of basketball knowledge that could fill a library. In 2011, she came back to Indiana as an assistant coach. And in 2012, she helped lead the Fever to their first ever WNBA championship. Their first ever. The whole city of Indianapolis went crazy. Stephanie White was right there, in the middle of it. In 2015, she became the head coach of the Fever for the first time. And in her very first season, her rookie season as a head coach, she led Indiana to the WNBA Finals. Let that sink in for a second. Her first year, the Finals. She became the first rookie head coach in WNBA history to lead a team to the championship series. In her first year, she left Indiana after 2016 to coach Vanderbilt at the college level. That didn't go as well. The SEC is a brutal conference, and building a program from scratch is harder than coaching a veteran WNBA squad. But she learned.
She grew.
She didn't quit. Then in 2023, she became the head coach of the Connecticut Sun. And in her first season with Connecticut, she won WNBA Coach of the Year. She took the Sun to the playoffs both years she coached them. She never missed the playoffs as a head coach. Not once. Across two different franchises, across multiple eras of the league, she never missed the postseason. In November of 2024, the Indiana Fever called her again. They needed a new head coach. And they needed someone who could handle the most unique, most pressurized coaching job in the history of women's basketball. Because by 2024, Caitlin Clark existed. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Broke Records. To understand what it means to coach Caitlin Clark, you first need to understand who Caitlin Clark is. And this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I promise you, every single word of it is real. Caitlin Clark grew up in West Des Moines, Iowa. Her grandfather would tell people later that by the time she was 5 years old, she could dribble a basketball and already had this sense, this anticipation, about where things were going to go before they happened. Like her brain was running the game at a different speed than everyone else around her. She went to Dowling Catholic High School, and she was a phenom. She was always talented, always competitive, always the kind of kid who made everyone around her better. But it was when she went to the University of Iowa, when she put on that black and gold Hawkeye uniform, that the whole world realized they were watching something different. Something that only comes along once in a generation. Maybe longer. By the time she was done at Iowa, Caitlin Clark had become the all-time leading scorer in NCAA basketball history. Not just women's basketball. All of NCAA basketball. She passed Pete Maravich, a man who played in an era with no three-point line, number 30-second shot clock, who averaged 44 points per game in college, and Clark passed him. She finished her college career with 3,951 points. No man or woman in the history of college basketball had ever scored more. But here's what made her truly special. It wasn't just the points. It was the way she played. She played with this swagger, this fearlessness. She would catch the ball 5 feet behind the three-point line, what they call the logo 3, because she was practically standing on the center court logo, and just let it fly. And it would go in. Over and over. She would look defenders in the eye and pull up from 30 feet like she was taking a layup. She played like someone who had absolutely nothing to lose and everything to prove, every single night. And she made people care. She made people who had never watched a single second of women's basketball sit down and tune in. Ratings went through the roof. Arenas sold out. She brought something to the game that is almost impossible to manufacture: genuine, authentic star power. In April of 2024, Indiana Fever selected her with the very first pick in the WNBA draft. The whole city was electric. They put her in a Fever jersey, and the basketball world changed. Her rookie year was extraordinary. She averaged 19.2 points, 5.7 rebounds, and 8.4 assists per game. She set a single-season WNBA record for assists. She set a single-season record for points by a rookie. The Fever made the playoffs for the first time since 2016. She was named Rookie of the Year. Then came 2025. And everything went wrong. Her sophomore season was a nightmare of injuries. Left quad, left groin, right groin, ankle. She played just 13 games all season. 13. The team that had exploded with excitement the year before watched their star limp through a season that felt like it would never end. By the time it was over, Clark had missed almost everything. An all-star game she was supposed to play in, gone. A season that was supposed to be her second step toward greatness, gone. She came back for 2026 desperate to prove something. Not to the world. She had already proved everything to the world. She needed to prove it to herself. She needed to feel like herself again. And to do that, she needed to be coached by someone who understood what she was capable of, who could push her to get there, and who would not back down when things got hard. Enter Stephanie White. Chapter 3. Sophie Cunningham, Enforcer. Before we get to the explosion on May 30th, you need to know one more person. Because in this whole story, this whole drama, the person who ends up holding everything together is Sophie Cunningham. Sophie was born on August 16, 1996, in Columbia, Missouri. Her parents were both college athletes at the University of Missouri. Her whole family breathed sports. In high school, she played basketball and volleyball. And when the kicker on her high school football team tore his ACL and couldn't play, Sophie Cunningham, a 6-foot basketball player, joined the football team as the kicker. She went 2 for 4 on field goal attempts. Because of course she did. She played college basketball at Missouri for 4 years. 129 career starts. She averaged 17 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. She was good. Really good. But nobody outside of the Big 12 was talking about her as a superstar. She got drafted. She spent 6 seasons with the Phoenix Mercury. She was a solid pro, a tough defender, a reliable three-point shooter, a player you wanted in the locker room because she brought energy and fire, and she was not afraid of anyone. Then in January of 2025, she was traded to the Indiana Fever in a 4-team deal. And everything changed. On the court, Sophie became something she had never quite been before, beloved. Playing alongside Caitlin Clark, her profile exploded. Fans started paying attention to her. They noticed the way she dove for loose balls, the way she set screens, the way she stood up for her teammates. And then came the moment that made Sophie Cunningham famous. In a game against the Connecticut Sun, a player named J.C. Sheldon poked Caitlin Clark in the eye. It was dirty, and Sophie saw it. She grabbed Sheldon and pulled her to the ground. Just took her down. Got ejected immediately. The whole game stopped. And the internet erupted. Not with anger at Sophie, with love. She became the enforcer, the protector, the teammate who would do absolutely anything for her people. She started a podcast called Show Me Something with her friend West Wilson. It became huge. She got brand deals with Adidas, Quest Nutrition, Sports Illustrated swimsuit. She became more than a basketball player. She became a personality, a brand, a voice that people genuinely wanted to hear from. She tore her MCL late in the 2025 season and missed the playoffs. It was devastating. But she rehabbed, she came back, and she signed a 1-year deal to return to the Fever for 2026. Because this team, this group of people, this crazy, chaotic, beautiful mess of a franchise, was where she belonged.
Now
we are ready to talk about what happened on May 30th. Chapter 4. The night everything boiled over. It was a Saturday night. The Indiana Fever were in Portland, Oregon, to play the Portland Fire, an expansion team that had only just entered the league. The Fever were supposed to win easily. They were a 12-point favorite. 12 points. Against a brand new franchise. This was supposed to be a get-right game, a confidence booster, a chance to shake off some early season inconsistency and feel good going into the next week. Instead, it became one of the most talked-about nights in recent WNBA history. The Fever came out hot. They jumped to an 8-2 lead early. Things looked fine. And then, with 6 minutes and 30 seconds left in the first quarter, Stephanie White made a decision. She pulled Caitlin Clark off the floor. She pulled Aaliyah Boston, her other star, off the floor too, along with Lexi Hull. She was rotating her players, managing their minutes, being careful, methodical, smart. And Portland ran a 19-4 run. By the time the first quarter ended, Portland led 29-15. What had started as a comfortable Fever lead had turned into a double-digit deficit in the span of a few minutes. Now, here is where it starts to get important. Caitlin Clark struggled all night. She was battling foul trouble from early on. Every time she got physical, every time she went for a block or a steal, she picked up another foul. And when you're in foul trouble, you play differently. You play more tentative. You second-guess yourself. The rhythm that makes Clark so dangerous, that fearless aggression, that willingness to take any shot, it gets disrupted. She finished the game with just 6 points. 6. It was her first single-digit scoring performance since June of 2025. The Fever lost 100-84. It wasn't close. And on the sideline, during the second quarter, a timeout was called. The team gathered in the huddle. And then a fan with a camera caught it. You could see Stephanie White in the video, animated, leaning forward from her chair, pointing directly at Caitlin Clark. Not once, multiple times. Slapping her knee in frustration. She was talking directly to Clark with intensity that was impossible to miss, even from the stands. And Clark at first just sat there, drinking water, looking away. She didn't respond immediately. Just let the words wash over her. But then she responded. Clark put both hands up in the air. That gesture. The gesture that became the image of the moment. Both hands up, head shaking, eyes frustrated.
She was pushing back.
She was saying something back to her coach. In front of the whole team. In front of the cameras. In front of the world. And then White made the call that sent the internet into absolute frenzy. She called Raven Johnson over. Raven Johnson, a rookie. A brand new player. White pointed to where Clark was sitting and had Johnson take her spot in the huddle. Caitlin Clark was removed from the huddle. The cameras zoomed in on Clark standing near the edge of the group, shaking her head. She was not in the huddle. The most famous player in women's basketball was standing just outside the circle that her own teammates formed around their coach. The clip hit social media within minutes. And then it was everywhere. Chapter 5. The Internet Goes to War. You have to understand the environment that surrounded this moment to understand what happened next. Because the Indiana Fever in 2026 were not just a basketball team. They were a cultural phenomenon. Every game they played was analyzed not just by basketball fans but by political commentators, media critics, and thousands of people who followed Caitlin Clark like she was a celebrity because she was a celebrity. And that level of attention, that kind of microscopic scrutiny, meant that a single video clip, a few seconds long, filmed from the stands by someone with a phone, could go from nothing to the biggest story in sports in the space of about 90 minutes. The clip spread, and the interpretations came flying in from every direction. Some people said Stephanie White had just publicly humiliated her own star player. That pulling Clark from the huddle was an act of dominance, a power move, a coach putting her player in her place in the most visible, embarrassing way possible. Others said Clark had been disrespectful, that you simply cannot, talk back to your coach like that during a timeout in front of the whole team. That there are rules, unwritten rules, about the relationship between a player and a coach, and that Clark had crossed a line. And then, from the darker corners of the internet, came the conspiracy theories. Fans, and they were loud, started saying that Stephanie White was actively trying to sabotage Caitlin Clark. That the first quarter substitutions, pulling Clark and Boston when they had the lead, was intentional sabotage. That White was jealous of Clark's fame. That she wanted Clark to fail. The word sabotage was trending. On a night when the Fever had just lost by 16 points to an expansion team, people were not talking about the box score. They were talking about a coach and a player standing near each other during a timeout. Some fans even claimed the video was AI-generated. They pointed to a blue object near the edge of the clip and insisted it was a digital artifact, a sign that the footage had been manipulated. Journalists who reviewed the clip said it appeared to be normal, compressed sideline footage. The blue object was almost certainly Clark's bench seat pad. But by that point, it didn't matter. The debate was everywhere. By Sunday morning, Stephanie White's mentions on social media were a war zone. Fever fans were furious. Some called for her firing. Some wrote long, detailed threads about every questionable decision White had made all season, every substitution, every timeout, every play call, and presented them as evidence of a pattern. Evidence that she was not the right coach for this team. Evidence that she and Clark could not coexist. It was the kind of moment that could break a team, could fracture trust, could turn a locker room into a battlefield. But that is not what happened. Chapter 6. The Responses. 2 days later, Caitlin Clark sat down with reporters. And she did not pretend the moment hadn't happened. She addressed it directly. But she also pushed back on the narrative that had built around it. She was asked what sparked the frustration that night. And her answer was simple and blunt and perfect. She looked at the reporters and she said, "We were down 20 points.
Probably that."
She acknowledged that there was competition, that there was intensity, that there were moments when that pressure could get to you and frustrate you in ways you didn't always handle perfectly.
"That's on me," she said.
"I have to be a lot better as well." But then she took a shot at the media. A real shot. "I think a lot of those things happen all the time. I know there's a camera on me, and that's how it's going to be. But there are a lot of people out there in the media or on TV who think they know a lot of things, and they are just blatantly wrong about a lot of things." She was not backing down from her own fire. She was not saying the moment was nothing, that there was no tension, that everything was sunshine and roses. But she was also saying very clearly that the story people had built around the moment was wrong. That the relationship between her and Stephanie White was not broken. That the drama people were seeing was not the reality she was living. Then Stephanie White stepped up. White stood in front of reporters and addressed the incident with a kind of calm authority that can only come from someone who has been through fires before. What happened in that moment is, I was challenging a player, she said. It's coaching, is what it is. But then she said something that stirred up a new conversation. She said, I don't often think it becomes an issue if you're watching it in men's sports, most of the time. And she was right. And she was wrong. She was right in the sense that men's basketball coaches and players get into animated exchanges on the sideline constantly, in the NBA, in college, everywhere, and nobody calls for the coach's firing. Nobody makes YouTube videos about sabotage. The intensity is seen as passion, as competition, as what it looks like when people genuinely care about winning. But she was also stepping into a complicated conversation, one about gender, about scrutiny, about the different standards that exist for women's sports, that some people felt was not the right time or place for that kind of commentary. The debate about what she said ran for another news cycle on top of the original clip. Because that is the world the Indiana Fever live in. Every word is analyzed. Every gesture is decoded. There is no off switch. And through all of it, one person was about to tell the most complete, most honest version of the story. Chapter 7. Sophie Speaks. Sophie Cunningham did not hide from the moment. She leaned into it. On the Show Me Something podcast, she sat down with her co-host West Wilson and she addressed the Clark White incident with a kind of candor that athletes almost never show in public. She started with the big picture. The foundation. The thing that she believed was true about both of these women. Steph and Cece are just two very competitive people who both want to win, she said. And sometimes you bump heads. But it was all out of good intent of wanting the same thing. She was not here to create drama. She was not here to pick a side. She was here to tell the truth as she saw it, as someone who had been in that locker room, in that gym, on that bench, as someone who knew both of these people not as public figures but as colleagues, as teammates, as human beings. But then she said something that made people listen even harder. Because Sophie Cunningham did not simply defend Clark. She did not wave away the moment and say, everything was fine. I'm not condoning her actions, she said. I think there is room to grow in how you respond to things. But she would say the same thing. That sentence. She would say the same thing. That is what separated this from a typical teammate defending teammate interview. Sophie was acknowledging, publicly, that Clark's response could have been handled differently. She was saying, in the most respectful way possible, that Caitlin Clark is not perfect, that she is young, that she is still learning, that even the best players in the world have things they need to work on, and one of those things for Clark right now is the way she handles pressure in the moments when it gets to be the most. But she also made clear that the relationship was intact, that Clark and White had already talked, already reconnected. Her and Steph are fine, Sophie said. And that's their relationship. Later that night or the next morning, they hugged it out and talked about it. They hugged it out. Two extremely competitive people who had clashed in front of the whole world on a Saturday night. By Sunday morning, they had hugged it out. Because at the end of the day, they were on the same team. They wanted the same thing. A championship. And you cannot get a championship by tearing each other apart. Sophie went further. She talked about the team meeting that had happened in the days after the Portland loss. A 2-hour meeting. What started as a coaches' meeting became a player-run meeting. The players themselves took over and started having the hard conversations that sometimes get avoided when the season is moving fast. We had a long meeting yesterday, Sophie said. It was a really good meeting. We peeled back all of the layers, and so I think everyone's on a good page right now, and we're ready to work. Peeled back all of the layers. That phrase is important, because it tells you something about what was actually going on in Indiana. It wasn't just one argument on one night. It was a season that had started with enormous expectations and had not lived up to them yet. It was a team that was still finding its chemistry, still figuring out how to play together, still navigating the enormous, constant, relentless pressure of being the most watched team in women's basketball. The meeting was what healthy teams do when things are not right. You stop pretending. You stop going through the motions. You sit in a room for 2 hours and you say the things that need to be said, and you listen to the things that need to be heard, and you come out the other side closer than you were when you walked in. Chapter 8. What the numbers said. Here is something interesting about this whole controversy. While the internet was exploding about the drama between Clark and White, and while TV commentators were debating what it all meant, the actual basketball numbers told a very different story. The Fever were not a disaster. They were not falling apart. They were a 4-4 team at the time of the Portland loss, right in the middle of the pack, playing inconsistent basketball, yes, but far from the catastrophic collapse that the loudest voices online were describing. Caitlin Clark, for all the talk about her struggles, was averaging 21.1 points per game for the season, 8.1 assists. She was still one of the best players in the league. The game against Portland, the 6-point game that sparked all of this, was an outlier. A bad night. Every great player has bad nights. Michael Jordan had bad nights. LeBron James has bad nights. Caitlin Clark had a bad night. Kelsey Mitchell, one of Indiana's veteran guards, was shooting at an impressive efficiency rate. Aaliyah Boston, Clark's teammate and the back-to-back #1 draft pick before Clark, had added a three-point shot to her game and was hitting 41.7% of her attempts from beyond the arc. The team had pieces. The team had talent. What they needed was time and chemistry and, perhaps, a catalyst. And that catalyst was coming. Chapter 9. The chest bump heard round the world. A few days after the viral argument. A few days after the team meeting. A few days after Sophie Cunningham went on her podcast and told the truth about what she saw, Indiana played the Atlanta Dream. They won, 83-71. And Caitlin Clark had 17 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds.
She was sick.
Actually sick. She had been dealing with illness leading into that game. And she still put up a 17-point, 8-assist night. But here's the moment that shut everyone up. The moment that said more than any press conference statement, any tweet, any podcast episode. During that game against Atlanta, Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White shared a chest bump. A chest bump.
Right there on the sideline.
In public. In front of the cameras that had captured their clash just days before. The message was clear. The relationship was real. The argument had been real, and the resolution was also real. These were not two people who hated each other. These were two people who cared desperately about winning, who had bumped up against each other in a moment of extreme frustration, and who had then done exactly what mature, professional people are supposed to do. They talked it out, they hugged it out, and they moved forward. And then White said something after that game that revealed everything about how she actually felt about Clark. She talked about the noise, the media coverage, the social media drama, the constant scrutiny, and she put it all in context. I don't know if the noise is ever going to be quiet, White said. This is what Caitlin does. She makes big shots and she has big moments.
She went on.
A lot of work that she puts in. It's been a rough go over the last 18 to 24 months for her. She's finding her way. And every opportunity that she gets to hit a shot, or to get a stop, or to get a pass, it's an opportunity to continue to feel more and more like herself and grow that confidence back. That is not what you say about a player you're trying to sabotage. That is what you say about someone you believe in. Someone you have been watching get back to herself after a brutal stretch of injuries, and someone you are willing to fight for, even when the fight sometimes means fighting with her. Chapter 10. The Shot. And then came June 8, 2026. The Indiana Fever against the Washington Mystics at CareFirst Arena in Washington, D.C. Entering that game, Clark had been going through what could politely be called a rough stretch. In the most recent games before that night, she had gone just 14 for 50 from the floor. 6 of 22 from three-point range. After a season-opening burst where she scored 24 points per game over the first 4 games, she had hit a wall. The back was bothering her. She had been wearing a back wrap, went off the floor to manage the pain. She was on the injury report practically every day. But she played. She kept playing. Because that is who Caitlin Clark is. She does not sit out unless she absolutely cannot walk. The Mystics were not rolling over. Washington actually had a good first half. Clark scored 10 points in the opening quarter, hit a couple of threes, and looked like she might be finding her rhythm. But then the Mystics mounted a run in the second half. They came back from a 14-point halftime deficit. And not only did they come back, they took the lead. In the final minutes of the game, Washington led 76-75. The Fever had the ball. A few seconds left. The season was not on the line, but a win was on the line. And for a team that had been through what the Fever had been through over the past 2 weeks, the Portland loss, the viral video, the team meeting, the scrutiny, all of it, getting this win felt important. Not just for the standings, for the soul of the team. Stephanie White called a timeout. Now, here is where the story gets a layer within a layer. Because, reportedly, there was a play drawn up during that timeout. A designed inbound play. Something specific, something controlled, something White and her staff had prepared. Sophie Cunningham took the inbound pass. And instead of running the design play, she looked for Clark. She threw a long, cross-court pass toward the opposite side of the floor. Clark caught it near the logo, near center court. She was close to 30 feet from the basket. 1.2 seconds on the clock. Clark took a breath. She set her feet. And she launched a 31-foot three-pointer. It went straight through the net.
Clean. Perfect.
Not even close to the rim. Just in. Buzzer. Fever win, 78-76. The arena erupted. Courtside fans lost their minds. Clark's teammates ran to her. The bench exploded. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, Sophie Cunningham, who had thrown the pass that set the whole thing in motion, was celebrating the kind of moment that only happens a few times in a career. After the game, Sophie posted on her Instagram. She shared an AI-generated image that joked about the fact that she and Clark had basically ignored the play that was drawn up and just made it work anyway. The whole team laughed about it. Some fans even wondered, was that exchange between Clark and White during the timeout, the look, the decision to improvise, the reason that moment at the Portland bench had happened? Was this some echo of a tension that existed between coaches and players about who was calling the shots in those pressure moments? Maybe. Maybe not. But the beauty of what happened on June 8th is that it did not matter. Whatever the plan was, whatever the disagreement might have been in that huddle, the result was a 31-foot buzzer beater from the most clutch player in the league, and the Indiana Fever were moving forward. Chapter 11. What Stephanie White said after. Stephanie White stood at that post-game podium in Washington, and she was not angry. She was not deflecting. She was not performing. She talked about what that shot meant, about what it meant for Clark specifically. You know, this is what Caitlin does, she said. She makes big shots, and she has big moments. And then she went somewhere personal. She talked about the road Clark had been on, about the injuries, about the lost season, about the long process of getting back to feeling like yourself after your body has failed you over and over again. It's been a rough go over the last 18 to 24 months for her, White said. And so, she's finding her way. And every opportunity that she gets to hit a shot like that, or to get a stop, it's an opportunity to continue to feel more and more like herself and grow that confidence back. And then came the line that if you understand basketball, if you understand the relationship between great coaches and great players, tells you everything you need to know about Stephanie White. I say this often. I think sometimes we take great players, and certainly generational talent, for granted. And what she did was incredible for us. She's going to have many more moments like that.
I know she is.
And we needed this one tonight.
She knows she is.
Not, I hope she is. Not, I believe she might be. She knows. Because Stephanie White has been watching Caitlin Clark since Clark was in 8th grade. She has studied her, coached against her, and now coaches alongside her. And she knows, the way that great coaches always know, when a player is coming back to themselves after a long time away. The argument at Portland was real. The frustration was real. The benching was real. And the recovery from all of it was just as real. Maybe more real. Chapter 12. What this is really about. So let's step back now. Let's look at the whole picture. Because this story, the story of Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, and Sophie Cunningham, is not really a story about a sideline argument. It's not really a story about a viral clip that the internet misunderstood. It's not a story about a coach who might be sabotaging her player because there was never any evidence of that, and the theory was always absurd. This is a story about what it actually looks like to build a championship team. It is not clean. It is not comfortable. It does not always look great on camera. When you have two people as competitive as Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark, a woman who has never missed the playoffs as a head coach, and a woman who is arguably the most talented basketball player of her generation, there are going to be moments when they clash. When the fire inside both of them burns so hot that it singes the people standing nearby. But those clashes, when they happen between people who share the same goal, who trust each other enough to have the argument and then have the conversation afterward, those clashes are not weaknesses. They are strengths. They are proof that nobody in the building is going through the motions. Nobody is satisfied with losing. Nobody is willing to shrug and say, "We'll get him next time." They are all, every single one of them, trying to win. Desperately. And Sophie Cunningham, the woman standing between them, the woman who on one night protects Clark from a dirty player by removing that player from the floor, and on another night throws the cross-court pass that leads to a buzzer beater, and in between sits down on her podcast and tells the honest, complicated truth about what she saw. Sophie Cunningham is the team in miniature. She is the bridge. She is the glue. She is the person who understands that competing hard and caring about each other are not opposites. That you can bump heads with someone and love them in the same week. That you cannot condone their actions and also know that those actions come from the same place yours do, from wanting, more than anything, to win. Chapter 13. The Bigger World. One more thing worth saying because it matters. Stephanie White was right when she said this wouldn't have been a story in men's sports. She was right. We have all seen clips of NBA coaches getting in the face of their players. We have seen players shove coaches. We have seen ejections and arguments and profanity on live television, and the response has generally been, "Wow, he's fired up," or "That's passion," or sometimes just nothing. Just the next highlight. Women's basketball does not get that grace. Every argument is a crisis. Every sideline moment is a breakdown. Every rough patch is evidence of permanent dysfunction. The microscope on women's sports, on the fever especially, on Clark specifically, is unforgiving in ways that the men's game rarely experiences at the same level. That's not an excuse for anyone's behavior. It's not a reason to ignore real problems when they exist. But it is context. And context matters. The Indiana Fever in 2026 are a team that is trying to figure themselves out under the brightest lights the WNBA has ever shown on a single franchise. The cameras are always on. The takes are always coming. Every decision Stephanie White makes is going to be second-guessed by people who have never coached a game in their lives. Every time Clark shakes her head or throws her hands up, someone is going to clip it and post it and add a caption about a feud that doesn't exist. And through all of that, these three women, the coach, the superstar, the enforcer, are trying to do something incredibly hard. They are trying to build something real. Something that lasts. Something that ends in a parade through Indianapolis with a trophy held high. They haven't gotten there yet. The 2026 season is still being written. But here is what I can tell you with confidence after looking at everything we know. Stephanie White is not trying to stop Caitlin Clark. She is trying to make her better. Caitlin Clark is not rebelling against her coach. She is competing. She is fighting. She is still finding herself after a lost year of injuries, and sometimes that means her fire spills over in ways that could be handled more smoothly. And Sophie Cunningham is not some minor character in the background of this story. She is the heartbeat, the podcast host who tells the truth, the passer who throws the cross-court ball instead of running the play, the teammate who drags someone off the floor and also stands up at the podium and says, "I'm not condoning her actions, but I understand her, and they're going to be fine." They hugged it out, and they moved on. Chapter 14. What comes next? As of right now, the Indiana Fever are climbing. After the buzzer beater against Washington, after the win over Atlanta, after all of the drama and all of the noise, they are moving in the right direction. Slowly, maybe not as fast as fans hoped, but forward. Clark is averaging over 21 points per game on the season. She hit 20 or more in 5 consecutive games after the Washington win. 8+ assists per game. She is back. Not all the way back yet. She is still managing a lingering back issue, still working through the process of getting her shooting percentages to where she knows they can be. But she is back enough. She is Caitlin Clark enough. Sophie Cunningham is having one of the best seasons of her career offensively. She scored 24 points against Toronto on 8 of 11 shooting, including 6 three-pointers.
6.
The Fever set a franchise record for points scored in a regulation game that night. She made her broadcasting debut on USA Sports because why not? She is a media personality now as well as a basketball player. She contains multitudes. And Stephanie White? She is doing what she has always done. She is watching the chessboard. She is adjusting. She is coaching. She went from being called a saboteur by people who watched a 15-second clip to watching her star player hit a 31-foot game winner and then standing at the podium and talking about what a generational talent Caitlin Clark is, with the kind of warmth and pride that can only be genuine. The noise, she said, is never going to be quiet.
She is right about that.
It won't be. Not with this team. Not with this player. Not with the level of attention that follows the Indiana Fever, wherever they go. But the noise was never the point. The point is the game. The point is what happens when the buzzer sounds and somebody has to make a shot. And right now, when the Indiana Fever needs someone to make a shot, Sophie Cunningham is the one throwing the pass, and Caitlin Clark is the one catching it near the logo, setting her feet, and letting it fly. And Stephanie White is the one standing on the sideline, watching it go in, and saying, I knew she would. She is going to have many more moments like that.
I know she is.
That is not a team falling apart. That is a team being built. Outro. So the next time you see a clip, the next time a 15-second video drops into your timeline and the captions are screaming and everyone is picking a side before they know a single fact, remember the story. Remember that Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White had an argument that looked terrible on camera and was resolved with a hug before the next morning came. Remember that Sophie Cunningham sat in front of a microphone and told the truth even when the easy thing would have been to just say, everything is fine. Because everything was not perfectly fine. But it was getting better. And sometimes the difference between a team that makes it and a team that doesn't is whether the people in the building are honest enough to have the hard conversations. Remember that a 31-foot buzzer beater doesn't happen unless Sophie throws the pass. And Sophie throws the pass because she trusts Clark. And Clark catches it and shoots it because she trusts herself. And White calls the timeout that sets the whole thing in motion because she trusts all of them.
Trust.
Built through arguments and team meetings and hugging it out and getting back on the floor the next day and doing it all over again. That is what you are really watching when you watch the Indiana Fever in 2026. Not a drama. Not a crisis. Not a sabotage. A team becoming itself. Under fire. In front of all of us. And the best part? The story is not over yet.